you'll be able to see Steve Ashworth. Steve is a partner or director, actually, aren't you, with PKF Francis Clarke, Accountancy and Financial Services. And he'll be talking about some of the implications financially and tax-wise of the furlough process. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with Kate Gardner from Clarke Willmott, who's done several furlough workshops for us and has been very useful and helpful. And talking about the HR and legal implications of furloughing staff. Very, very important that we get it right as employers coming back in and bringing people back in, hopefully in the right way. So I'm going to hand over to Steve. I will be running the presentation, so give me a couple of seconds and I'll mute you all and then unmute Steve and Kate and myself. I'll be running the presentation, so Steve, when you want the next slide, just let me know.
Will do.
All right, Steve, you should be good to go now.
Okay.
I should just share my screen.
Yeah, the slides will be good. Morning, everybody. Just while the slides are coming up, I think we've done the thing. I've noticed Alistair and I's got the same look this morning. So I had my COVID-19 hair trim yesterday. Not that there's a lot to trim, and we've ended up the same sort of image and that. But morning, and welcome to this. As Alistair's already said, I'm Steve Ashworth. I work for PKF Francis Clarke. Many of you will probably know Francis Clarke from being based, one of our offices is in Taunton, right next door to Clarke Willmott. So we're out at Blackbrook. I actually work in our Bristol office, and we've got a number of offices elsewhere. The next slide, I think, has my beautiful image and everything on there. And what we're talking about today, I haven't got my contact. I realise fundamental error from my part and my marketing team part. I didn't put my contact details on the slides, but I'm sure if you get hold of Alistair and or you just go to Francis Clarke's website, you'll find me pretty easily, because there certainly seems to be a lot of random people finding me at the moment who I've never heard of, who seem to be sending me emails on job retention scheme. I work in the employer solutions team, so whereas Kate does the employment law side of things, I do the tax side, and that's been my focus for the last few weeks. Today, we're really going to be looking at bringing staff back from furlough. So just going to the next slide, I didn't want to spend too much time actually on the past, but I didn't feel I could ignore it altogether. And Kate might have a little bit more to say, but I really wanted to just look a little bit, very briefly, at where we are now. And more importantly, and this is the purpose of today, is thinking about bringing your staff back from furlough and some of the issues and everything that you may need to think about. Some of the points have got a very generic points, and others are more focused towards the end. Just some of the things you can be thinking about, maybe from a tax perspective of what are you going to be doing for your employees in the future. Next slide, please. So February, March, and I'll even add April in there now. It already seems a long time ago. Not asking for any sympathy here, but both Kate and I are probably both aware of having spent quite a few late nights, not together with our teams, looking at HMRC's releases of information and the government's releases of information, which they kindly seem to send on a Friday evening, late Friday afternoon, which took away most of Friday nights for a few weeks, and Saturdays, while we tried to get information out there. Initially about the scheme and understanding the scheme and what it would mean and who could be furloughed and who couldn't be furloughed. I think altogether, and I might be wrong on my number here, there's been 12 different releases of information now, which then progressed into the calculation itself and looking at the 80% that you could claim back up to £2,500. And then we moved in April, the big build-up was going to be the claim process and would this portal work. And I am ex-HMRC from about 15 years ago now, but it's not often I give them credit, but well done to them for a portal, because it seems to have come in. There's a few little hiccups, and I'll touch on a few issues and that in a minute or two, but the claim process seems to have gone pretty well. And I suspect that from the 20th of April, a lot of you, if not all of you, will have put your claim in, and hopefully some of you will have got your money in that back now through the grant process. Not everyone has claimed. I was dealing with a client yesterday whose claim was still going through, so there's you know, there's still people actually doing that. So next slide. So we've gone through this understanding and trying to understand exactly what this whole process and that means, and we've got to where we are now. And as you will have heard maybe on the news, we've had hundreds of thousands of employers actually applying for millions of employees, and we're up to billions of funding. This is a major cost for the government on a monthly basis, and that is why I'll touch on in a minute, some of Rishi's, the Chancellor's announcements this week and that have set a bit of people who are a little bit worried now for job retention schemes going forward. If you ever do need any help, the numbers there for the COVID-19 helpline, I have actually happened to have rung them a couple of times myself, and they've been very helpful. Certainly the online chat has been very receptive to giving some answers and that back. You may have seen some issues that we've had at the moment. There was one with national insurance numbers and people who didn't have national insurance numbers. The expectation is you will try and find your national insurance numbers for your employees. You can use the online system if you need to actually find it, or if you can't, you can actually ring the helpline and they will try and assist you in lifting the information that you provide to them. So I think at one time I did hear this story about putting a national insurance number in as CJ, I think it was, for you know, the start of coronavirus and job, and then a series of zeros and a letter at the end, but I'm not convinced that works. But there has been some issues with the uploading of national insurance numbers, and that could lead to some rejected claims. Holiday pay, I'll probably leave that to Kate to actually talk a little bit more about, but we have had fun with holiday pay and exactly what it means. And of course, we're at a time when there's been a number of bank holidays, and if you've actually, you know, sort of paid out some holiday pay, there's a possibility that you should have been doing that at 100% and not 80%. But I'll let Kate talk more because there's a few little peculiarities around it. I'm not sure if we'll have anyone on the webinar about who's an annual payment for directors especially. This has come up as there was a little bit of clarification that HMRC snuck in a little surprise last week in there. Well, not a surprise, a bit of clarification. It came through, I think, unexpected Thursday, Friday sort of time last week, just about if you're an annual payment, can you actually claim? Basically HMRC said that you can make a claim if it was prior to, if you were on an RTI submission prior to the 19th of March, so during last year. But how you calculate it's a little bit sort of tricky just to think about how you actually work out the number you put through. But we have seen a few had a few conversations with employers and clients over, can they adjust when they actually make the annual payment? So normally you may have chosen with a revenue to make an annual payment in October, say, but can you now move it to May or June? The system does allow you to do it. The question with a few of these things is whether it's within the spirit of the law to actually do that. But the guidance is there, it does allow you, but should you, may be down to your own decision-making process. Seasonal working has been a little bit like directors' annual payment, that sometimes people have been left on the payroll. And so long as they were left on the payroll and the right radio buttons on the system on the RTI submissions had been pushed, you should be able to bring seasonal workers back because they've remained, so long as they've remained on your payroll during up to the 19th of March and you never gave a P45. TUPE has created a few issues. mainly, again, one more to be discussed by Kate, but the TUPE has been where maybe a number of employees have moved from one payroll to the next payroll. And when you've actually made your submission, if you've had anyone who TUPE'd across, it may have thrown up an error message because you've suddenly got more employees on the scheme than you've had previously on your earlier RTI submissions. And the advice again there is ring that helpline for some clarification. Certainly claims have been complex. We've seen a number of complex claims going through. I was amazed at the numbers of claims that went in on that Monday morning in the first half an hour, because I know certainly on that, from our perspective, some claims have taken hours and hours and days to actually work out in some cases. So not everything is straightforward. And there has been a number of rejected claims. And if a claim is rejected, it makes it very, very difficult. Well, you can't go back and adjust it if you've pressed the submit button and made a mistake, or it gets rejected. And again, it's that helpline number, which is why it's quite important to speak to. And the last issue, just to bring up for where we are at the moment, there has been a few questions around weekly and monthly payrolls which overlap. And if you do have weekly payrolls which then run, say it starts on the 27th of April and it runs into the next claim period, the theory is you should be claiming 3/7, say, or 4/7, or whatever it is, of that last week's payroll, and then the other part of it in the next month. This has had a lot of debate, and I'm not convinced HMRC will really pick at it if you just moved it into the next month, but it is there as a possible error, which the revenue may pick up in the future. Okay, next slide, please. Those are sort of the issues that we've got at the moment for where we actually are. So what about this going forward? You will have heard this week, and we've got an expectation to come out this week. Prior to, I think, yesterday, I've lost track of what day it is, might have been Monday, we were getting a little bit concerned that we're approaching this cliff edge, and from the job retention scheme point of view of June the 20th. Now, the Chancellor said it won't be a cliff edge. There's going to be a sort of a gentle sort of removing the job retention scheme, but it's still a concern for what will happen. The Prime Minister is going to announce this week, Sunday, might be a little bit of lead into it on Thursday, this roadmap out of lockdown. And Kate will certainly be talking about this in more detail, but some of the things which have come out are to do with hygiene procedures, physical screens in work, and down to this, how do you stagger shifts, staff canteens, you can't hot desk anymore, which is ironic that for HMRC that their new office setup is based around hot desking, so I don't know how they're going to get back to work in the main, but lifts half empty, social distancing, and not even pen sharing. So if you go back, so there's a lot of things to be picked up on. You may have seen some media outlets did release a summary of the 7 documents which relate to this, which the Prime Minister is going to talk around at them next week. But if you want to have a look, if you go to BuzzFeed, you might find a link to a little summary that goes from business by business, sector by sector, telling you some of the things that you might need to be thinking about. But this is all leading to reopening the economy. We've been using the phrase getting businesses back on track. I did just the anecdotal bit at the bottom of, I was on a call with a business the other day, and they've actually paid an extra £1 to all the staff to an hour if they keep to the social distancing as a bonus, presumably tax and national insurance on it to follow that. But the actual cost for them, they're a large business, £100,000 a week to do that, to encourage their workers to keep a social distance. Next slide, please, Alistair. All of this is going to be, we've touched on. There's the government, the CBI and the business representatives out there really want this to come back. Some flexibility, but within a framework. It could be sector by sector and businesses by business returning to work. So there's probably going to be some kind of phased program of return. we may get into this world of more flexibility around the furloughing, maybe even partial furloughing. I know some of my payroll colleagues, it petrifies them, the thoughts of partial furloughing and how that might actually work in practice due to some of the complications and everything which are floating around at the moment just with normal furloughing, if we do it that way. But there could be more conditions and everything around it and how it's actually going to be withdrawn. The main issue is that this is costing the government now so much. And there has been talk around maybe they'll bring it down, they'll reduce the 80% down to 60 or 40, just so that they encourage businesses to get back on track, as we're using with a frame. And it's this move I picked up the other day that people were talking about. We put our employees into hibernation, and now it's time to animate them again and get back moving and moving forward. Next slide, please. So, you've all been involved with this. I mean, we've been trying to support businesses through this, but as business owners, you've been sort of through this crisis survival mode. And the real push now is, how do you evolve your businesses and what's the economic restart for it? You've probably been preparing. We've been talking, my colleagues, lots of about sort of a number of pillars to come back under, developing a strategy, looking at your market, looking at your brand, thinking about you as a leader, how you're going to do it with your key assets. And your key assets, I cannot stress enough, are your people, your employees. And it's really, how do you engage with them? How do you communicate? Are you going to carry on furloughing, or is there an element of non-furloughing in there? And, you know, this has been stressful for everybody. But you've got your emotional and mental well-being of your employees to be thinking about as well. Next slide. So the whole thing, this is a common phrase used, build back better. I'm sure your businesses, you know, hopefully they are already exciting and engaging, but maybe now has been the time that you've been doing your DIY at home and tidying around the house. And if you've had free time on your hands, maybe part of that, you do a little bit of DIY within your business and you look at what your business setup is. And if you're going to be bringing back your employees, how are you going to motivate yourself, drive your business forward and get those employees back on working for you and enthusiastic? We've touched on this, you know, there might be some evolution here to the furloughing and partial furloughing sort of systems in place. Your employees are going to be pretty unsettled, I think. It's going to be a concern, this return to work. So you need to be dealing with that. And that's why you need to communicate with them. You will have had a number, or you may have some employees who have been actually working hard and were never furloughed. So you might have a workforce who some have been furloughed and working to keep your business ticking over, and those who have been at home on furlough. So you need to work out how you're going to do this. And of course, one of your problems may be there may be no pay rises. You may not have that cash flow, that money to actually, you know, sort of give people, you know, expected pay rises for quite a while. Next slide, please. So what are you going to do? Your employees, you need to be looking at retaining them, rewarding them, maybe recruiting or retraining. Those last 2 points might switch around. In fact, these might be in any order. You know, what do you need to do to reward, to retain your employees? Do you need to bring new employees in and retrain them? Your workforce may need to alter if your business model and that's changed. Next slide. So what can you be doing? This is a sort of tax bit of it, and that as I sort of just head towards the end, but it's, you know, your planning stage of, there's not a lot of options as an employer. I mean, the revenue hasn't changed, HMRC, and if it doesn't move, they will try and tax it. Nothing's altered there. You'll know that from your payroll. There's very little flexibility to give something to your employees without it being taxable. But there are some tax efficient employee benefits and expenses out there. You've got the trivial benefits, which gives you, you know, there's rules and that around it. And I'll happily talk to anybody outside of this without going into all the detail. may know this, of making use of £50 per employee. It costs you money, I appreciate, but it could be a trivial benefit, just as simple as maybe bringing a breakfast in or something like that for your employees, or finding some way. So long as the revenue couldn't argue it's a reward or recognition for work, it's because of something else that you could make use of these trivial benefits. And there are a number of tax-free benefits out there. This is only, I've just listed a few down there. Employee assistance program, and health screening and well-being might be critical for some of your employees. So long as it doesn't move into treatment, you can actually, provide some health screening, well-being, just to help your staff along. Workplace parking, which I've put in there. Now that could be quite an interesting one. That's paying for your employees to have parking at or near your workplace. Now you can do that tax-free. Now that could be more important, because one of the measures that might come out of the Prime Minister's documents when he does his this weekend, and that could be there will be an expectation of only one person per car, and that you won't be doing shared parking, so there might be a need for more parking. Okay. Retraining costs, I've just touched on retraining as being one of the things for your employees, and maybe getting some workplace meals. Meals will be interesting in a workplace. Can you, if you're taking your own food, can you put it in the fridge and near other people's food? So maybe there was an opportunity to provide a meal, so long as everybody gets it within your home, within the workplace. Looking at, I've also got home working, which might continue. There's this wonderful £6 a week that an employee can claim for actually working at home, and if they incur additional costs, that can go beyond that. Or maybe you can make use and give your employees a tax-free loan if it needs to be, to get them through it. Salary sacrifice is an opportunity. Encourage a few people to cycle to work at the moment. Pensions, or even into company cars. There are opportunities for low emission vehicles and electric vehicles to work very, very well under salary sacrifice. And that is a way of helping save some employers' national insurance if you don't do it at the moment. Certainly for pension schemes, quite important that you consider using salary sacrifice. So it's something to think about if you don't already do salary sacrifice within your business. Now might be the time to do share schemes. I'm not sure how you value your businesses at the moment, but it might be an opportunity to look at, on the reward front of it. We've had a number of employers and clients come to us recently asking about share schemes and putting share schemes in place for all employees, just to get them on the same, help build the business back up and be a key part of it. There might be even some more moves to EOT, employee ownership trust set up. That's become quite interesting. The sort of John Lewis model for some employers out there, and that to actually use. So now might be the time to bring in a share scheme if you don't already have one. And I can't finish without saying the R word in there of redundancy. And I think it will be inevitable. There will be some redundancies. There'll be a number of redundancies, and termination payments and how they are structured can be very, very costly, but there are opportunities to save some money within the sort of structure of the termination payments. So it's always worth talking to your advisor on that. And just to finish, don't forget, in amongst all this, that we have one of HMRC's key reporting dates for employers coming up of the 6th of July, to do with your P11Ds, making sure your PSAs, pay-as-you-earn settlement agreements, and that are in place. So that's something worth thinking about and not forgetting as you are removed from your businesses at the moment. So quite a lot to think about there, quite a lot of things to consider from a tax point of view. And that, Alistair, just wraps up. I think that's my last slide, just on what I wanted to talk about at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of extra. Oh, everyone's read those. Brilliant.
Yeah. Disclaimer always there.
Skip past term and condition. Yeah, you've got a number there. You're based out of Bristol, are you, Steve? So that Bristol number, the 0117 403 9800.
Yeah. 9810 gets right through to me if anybody wants that. So 9810 is my direct line.
9810 is Steve's direct dial. Brilliant. Okay,
Yeah.
Steve, thank you very much.
That's
some
all right.
good points there. We're going to move on to Kate. So I'm going to unmute Kate. So hopefully you can hear me, Kate. And more importantly, you're able to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. Brilliant. Excellent. So, Kate, I'm gonna pass over to you then to pick up on the legal elements of the furlough scheme.
Brilliant. Thank you, and good morning to everybody. And I'd like to say that Steve and Alistair, you're looking very, very smart. Some of them have let their hair grow and can't wait for the end of lockdown just to get back to the hairdresser. And I'm sure all those businesswomen out there will appreciate that comment. I've resisted my teenagers' clippers so far, but it won't be long now. So welcome to this talk, which is primarily about un-furloughing employees, and hopefully will give you some guidance and tips through what could be a tricky path. And yes, we are waiting for yet again more guidance, and so this will be an unravelling process, no doubt, when more guidance comes in at the end of this week. Alistair, I think I'm just going to skip straight to slide 3 because I've got quite a lot to say about back to work, which has all come out last night. So I think if we just go probably next slide, and the next one, we'll go to how to furlough, and then on to the next one, because this is probably relevant. All those employees that you did furlough, probably seems a long time ago, as Steve was saying, now is the time to revisit what you agreed with them if you are contemplating unfurloughing. Hopefully you did have something in writing. Even if you didn't, try and recall or revisit what was said to them at that time. The purpose of this is to know, what did you say? Did you give a set period? Did you say you were going to review that? As we know, for the purposes of a claim, an employee has to be furloughed for at least a 3-week period. So if you are now in the second tranche of a 3-week period, so coming up to 6 weeks, you need to complete that second 3-week period. Be sure to do that before you unfurlough any employee. So that's my first point, really. What did you say? Have a revisit of that. And anything you do next with an employee, that will need to be in writing as well. Next slide, please. The furloughing of 20 or more employees, do I need to collectively consult staff? That is going to come to the fore again, because I'm going to be talking about redundancies. There was a query back at the beginning of the furloughing scheme whether the process of putting staff on furlough could kick in collective consultation duties on employers if more than 20 people were involved. On balance, the legal view is probably not. However, if you are now contemplating a lot of redundancies, particularly more than 20, you will need to consider these rules. The real process involved in this is a consultation period. If you have more than 20 or more staff that you may be considering redundancy, then you are going to have to go through collective consultation for at least 30 days before you issue the first notice of dismissal for redundancy. If that is for 20 up to 99 employees. If there are more than 99, i.e. 100 or more employees that you may be considering making redundant and putting through a redundancy process, you will have to consult for at least 45 days before you issue any notices of dismissal. The process itself is relatively complex in that you need to appoint employee representatives if you don't have collective agreements in place. So some thought does need to go into that. You can't be thinking, oh, furlough is going to run out next week. I'll just make all those people redundant and some of them can come back to work. What you need to do now is plan on who you need at work, what they're going to be doing, and if you are going to be needing to make redundancies, whether you will have to consider this collective consultation process. And again, a bit more on that later, but something that I would suggest you might need assistance with. And I say that because the downside is if you get this wrong, then there is potential for each employee to claim as a one-off award, apart from any unfair dismissal claim they might make, an additional award of up to 13 weeks pay. So that could be, even if you're paying, £500 or less, if you've got 20 employees, just a very rough calculation, I'm sure Steve will correct me if I'm wrong, that could be immediately £12,000 or £13,000, and that's just for 20 employees. So it's something you really can and do need to get right. Just next slide, please. Sorry, and the next one, we covered that. And the next one. I've just mentioned already this and reminded you about the minimum of 3 weeks. And I would say that again, it is important. I did have some queries this week about employers wanting to consider hopefully moving back to more of putting people back into work. Could they have some employees just on 1 week furlough? Well, if you do that, you're not going to be successful in claiming back the grant for that period. So remember, the 3 weeks is very important. You can rotate staff, so you could have some working 3 weeks, some not. So remember that. Again, all this should be evidence in writing with those individual employees. Next slide, please. Don't forget that currently, when on furlough, employees cannot undertake any work. There has been a lot of talk this week, and as Steve mentioned, will there be a form of un-furloughing which will allow employers to let people do some work? And that is something that Keir Starmer was asking questions about this week as well. So we may see a period of time when you can reduce furlough and employees may be allowed to undertake some work for their employers. At the moment, however, it's a no-no. They can undertake work for other organisations. They can undertake voluntary work, unless you're a charity. They can't do it for you because that may be generating revenue or providing a service to you. So again, take care with that, but we'll keep listening and we'll keep you informed. Next slide, please. Annual leave. Again, as Steve mentioned, there have been a lot of questions about holidays, so I thought I'd do a quick few minutes on this. The guidance now is that it is possible to take annual leave whilst on furlough for employees to do that, but as an employer, you will have an obligation to top up furlough pay to 100%, and that will be their normal pay. So that could include any normal bonuses or regular overtime payments in the past. So you could be paying that extra 20%. It will still be open for you as an employer to claim 80% back. Can you require employees to take that annual leave? Yes, you can, but there are rules under the working time regulations, and essentially those are, if you are requiring them to take leave, you need to give each employee at least twice as much notice as the period of leave they are taking. So if they're going to take a week's leave, as the third week of furlough, give them 2 weeks notice of that, and that will be lawful. Don't forget that right at the beginning of this lockdown process, there was a new law issued that employees will be able to carry over unused and accrued holiday for a period of up to 2 years if they cannot take it for COVID-19 related reasons. So many employees may want to retain that holiday, so you do need to have that conversation with them. But as I say, it is possible to require them to do so. And of course, as an employer who is wanting to rebuild their business, you do not immediately want everyone taking 3 or 4 weeks of leave possibly this autumn, even if we are not going to be flying anywhere for a while. So So that is something to think about, and again, something we can help with if needed. Next slide, please. Notice pay when on furlough. Again, there's been a lot of talk on this. What if you have already decided you are going to be making some employees redundant, or you're going to be dismissing employees? They may be employees who've been with you for less than 2 years, so that you have less concerns about unfair dismissal or redundancy rights. But can you make them serve notice during the furlough period? Well, yes, you can. If that is the case, what about notice pay? Well, this is when the general employment law kicks in, and as usual, it is far from easy to understand. There are two points here. Number one, if you have an employee who has a contractual notice period, so something written in their contract which gives them more notice than the general law does. So, for example, I have an employee who's only been with me 1 year, so under the general law, she would only be entitled to 1 week's notice. However, in her contract, I have said she can have 1 month's notice. So what the law says in that case is, if I give her notice, then she does not have a right to be paid the full pay. She can take a minimum payment for notice. So I've got to give her 1 month's notice or pay her in lieu, but I could just pay her 80% for that month. If, however, which is much more normal, you have an employee who has a period of notice which is equal to or less than, it would have to be equal to be lawful though, equal to the general law minimum periods for notice. So I have an employee who's been with me 12 years, they get 3 months notice, 12 weeks notice. Then I cannot pay them less than 100% for notice pay. So basically that's going to be the majority of your workforce. If you're giving them notice, you are very likely to have to pay them 100%. So you're going to have to top up that furlough pay if you're only paying 80% and using furlough as a notice period. So again, take care with that. You should be able to claim back the 80%, but you will have to pay the extra, or they will have an unlawful deduction of wages claim, which they can issue in the Employment Tribunal. And albeit remotely, the Employment Tribunal is functioning. Next slide, please. Okay, now the business of un-furloughing staff, which is what we hopefully will be involved in shortly. It should be a relatively straightforward process. You need to give reasonable notice. Bear in mind the 3-week period, which I've talked about already, so that you can make sure you can claim back the furlough pay. Make sure you put it in writing to that individual, and you have an unfurloughing letter for each employee. Give the reason why you need them back and how long that's likely to be for. Is it temporary? Hopefully not, but you could again have a period that you saying it is likely they will be needed for this period up until a date, and you will keep it under review. Don't forget, again, as I've already mentioned, you could do this rotation, keep some people on furlough whilst the furlough scheme is still running. A very important point is selection. Are you going to be selecting certain employees who you may prefer? Be careful, because the discrimination laws are still out there and still strong and apply to all furloughed employees. So you need to make fair and reasonable selection, and that can be based on skills and experience. Okay, so take care with that. What about pay? Well, this might seem obvious, but you should confirm to those employees that they will be coming back to normal pay. So unless you are seeking to agree otherwise, that will be 100% of pay. However, there may be less work, or there may be less work for a certain period of time. So what if you want to reduce pay or reduce hours when they come back? That is something you can do. And there are a number of ways of doing that. Number one, you impose it. You say, this is what's going to be happening. That is a little bit risky. If an employee comes back to work, does what you want, then it could be implied that they have accepted that. Better way is, of course, to seek to agree that with them, either individually or if you have trade unions or employee representatives as a group, as a collective agreement. And it is likely that they will be willing to agree that if you explain fully what those circumstances are, and what you're trying to do is rebuild the business, as Steve was talking about, and rebuild it in a better way and rebuild it in an efficient way so that there is a future for every employee. But for now, they may need to work 3 days a week, 4 days a week. They may need to stay on an 80% pay package. So that's two ways. You simply unilaterally impose. Two, you seek to agree it. What if you seek to agree it and they refuse? Well, you can dismiss and re-engage on new terms. That is a process that has always been available to employers when they're seeking to change fundamental terms at work. And this will be a fundamental term if it relates to pay and hours, whatever your contract says, in my view. So that process will need to involve a formal hearing, can be done remotely. You need to set out a clear business reason why you're making this fundamental change, and then you need to offer immediately a new contract under the new terms so that you're mitigating any loss, you're avoiding an unfair dismissal claim, and you're setting out a new future for that employee. So those are the choices. And again, you may need some assistance with that if you are going to be making some changes to pay and hours, possibly only in the short term. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Redundancies. Steve did mention this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I realise we are a little bit short of time, but it is probably inevitable that there will be a number of redundancies when we come out of lockdown. As I've said already, it is very important to consider if you're going to be making more than 20 employees redundant in a 3-month period, then you do need to carry out this collective consultation. And that involves finding an HR1 form, taking time to carry out consultation and following that process. Voluntary redundancy might be a way forward. That is always helpful. You may be surprised who might be willing to take that up. So that's good as a first step. Redundancy, take care always. If you're involving employees who have more than 2 years service, they can claim unfair dismissal if you don't follow a correct process. Furlough is not a warm-up for redundancy. You can't say that was a consultation period. You cannot say that that was part of consultation or notice unless you've already gone through a redundancy process prior to furlough. So you need to consider, is this a genuine redundancy? Are you going to be closing any workplaces? Is there less work out there? Are you going to be reducing the workforce? If the answer is yes, then you have potential to make a redundant fair dismissal. You need to consider 3 points then. 1, consultation. 2, a fair basis of selection. And 3, consideration of alternative employment. Those are the 3 things. And again, we can help you on a day-to-day basis if you need that assistance with that redundancy process, and particularly with any collective consultation. What about an alternative to redundancy? What about reducing hours and pay? That's something I've already talked about. And again, the way forward would be to agree that individually, collective agreement with trade unions if that's relevant, fire and rehire, the process of dismissal and re-engage, or imposing that and taking a risk and hoping that they carry on working without protest and will be deemed to accept those changes. Always better to agree. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes now talking about back to work health and safety. There's a lot out there on this, and there will be a lot more, but I just want to do a very quick fire, if we have time, 2 minutes on health and safety, because I think this is something that's really important. The big question: what if employees refuse to come back to work? What if you send them a nice letter saying, please come back to work, it's all going to be great, I'm going to pay you 100%, and you can take all your holiday next year? What if they say, no, I don't feel safe? Well, can you dismiss them? Can you not pay them? Yes, but if they have a reasonable belief that they are in serious and imminent danger, if they do come back, then any dismissal will be automatically unfair and could be very expensive for you in the tribunal. So take care on what you are saying to those employees to encourage them to come back to work. And to help you with that, you need to know what your duties are. There's been a lot of talk this week in the media and in Parliament about government guidance. Is there enough government guidance? There needs to be more. But there's a lot of health and safety law out there already. And it's your duty as an employer to ensure, where reasonably practicable, that the health, safety and welfare of all employees and any visitors to the workplace, so connected with the business, you need to ensure there is a safe place of work. And a breach of that duty is a criminal offence, so the penalties are high. The government guidance in itself is helpful in that it could form, if you follow the government guidance, that's evidence that you are trying to put in place a safe system, but it's probably not enough. You need to ensure you are carrying out, 1, a risk assessment at work, 2, you're setting up a safe system of work, having identified what is safe following that risk assessment, and 3, you need to make sure that system is followed. There are lots of elements to this, these standards, but the duty is on you as an employer, and that's going to involve control of infected persons. That's going to involve respiratory transmission control, so social distancing. If you can't carry out social distancing at work, then you need to provide PPE, that personal protection equipment. You need to ensure people are trained to use it. You need to control contact risks. You need to consider, should you have people working in teams, in cohorts, you need to ensure that you've got those facilities for hand washing and that they're being used, and all those safe systems that you're putting in place are continually reviewed. You're carrying out training and you're making sure they're being followed. And if you don't do all those things, then you could be in breach of health and safety rules and you could be a criminal. So I'm going to stop there because there's a lot to think about, and there's going to be more coming from the government this weekend, which we'll need to think about as well. As Steve has said, there's a lot for accountants and employment lawyers to think about and try and help you with at this time. But I did hear quite a startling statistic that may actually alert my matrimonial partners to get very busy, and that is that apparently at least 12% of all British couples during lockdown are now re-evaluating their futures together. I'm sure that doesn't apply in your household, and I hope, however, that this has been useful, at least in considering what you're going to be doing next at work.
That's a nice way of ending it. Thanks, Kate. Right, we do have some questions here. Thank you very much, first of all, to both of you. It's sobering, obviously, to understand where we are as businesses, but I think it's really important that we understand that and take ownership of that and make sure that we're educating ourselves in the right way. So it's really good to see the amount of people on here and the amount of people that are continuing to engage with this. So we do have a few questions. So just a little clarification on the date that the current furlough scheme goes up to. Steve, you mentioned the 20th of June? Oh, hang on, I need to unmute you. Beg your pardon, Steve. Sorry. Give me 1 second. There we go. Sorry.
It's the end of June. It goes to the
End
end
of
of June. So
End
30th,
of June. Okay.
30th, as it is at the moment. So that
Right,
might
okay.
change in the next few days.
Thank you. And obviously, we're trying to avoid that cliff edge, so it's likely there'll be certain elements that will continue. So
Yeah.
that's fine. Thank
Yeah.
you. We've got a question around childcare. If you've got a member of staff that is furloughed at the moment and you want to bring them back, but they're saying they can't because of childcare, Kate, something you can pick up on there?
Yes, and I was pretty sure we would get a question on that. I think that is going to be a difficult one, but there's no reason why you can't consider alternatives such as home working, if that's possible, or maybe could they do a reduced job or transfer to another job which may be working at home. The reality is, until the schools go back, this is going to be an ongoing dilemma, and that's something that we're very much hoping the government's going to address and help us with, because under the current system, if you're carrying at home, then you can use furlough, and what happens if furlough ends but the schools don't go back? So I think that's something we're going to have to watch and see. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess there could be it could be dangerous ground legally, obviously, to discriminate against people that have got families there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, hopefully further clarification on that to come. We've got one around the if we've stated the end date on an original furlough letter and sticking to it, do you still need to send an un-furlough letter? And then again, what if you send an extension letter again stating the end date? So I guess the original question there is, if you've furloughed somebody with a stated end date, do you still need to unfurlough?
Yeah, that would be my advice, definitely.
Belt and braces, yeah. Why would you not?
Yeah.
And then if you send an extension letter, again state the end date. I mean, I think probably, and look, I'll cede to you, Kate, but my understanding would be that most businesses are saying that it's for a minimum period until further notice.
Yeah.
Without stating an end date. Would that be fair?
Yes. It's quite difficult to set that end date because, as we've seen, the furlough period's been continued, so it's difficult to be certain. But keep writing, really, because
keep that communication up.
Yeah,
and keep it recorded clearly.
Yes.
Question on fire and rehire. Do they take their notice, or do we pay it on top of their normal pay, even if the end and start date are consecutive?
Okay, so they can agree not to have a notice period. But actually, if you are re-engaging on new terms, notice doesn't come into it. They just have continuity of employment. They just go straight onto the new terms. But if they are on a better, in normal life, and we can just about remember that, if you were changing somebody's terms, they would be entitled to continue what they might perceive to be better terms throughout their notice period, and then move on to the new terms. So yes, notice may apply. Again, you want to consider each individual case for this.
Yeah. Okay, fine, thank you. Again, we've got one around the extended furlough, and I think the question's been answered, that one. What's the situation around bonus and commission payments that are owed? Those are the normal employment terms, I suggest, Kate, so they wouldn't be covered under furlough, but would the employer be liable to pay those still?
So if we're talking about bonuses and commissions that have accrued, well, they are going to be entitled to payment of those at some point.
Yep.
You may not have to pay those during furlough, but if they've genuinely accrued, then you shouldn't be deducting those. No.
Okay. And then when furlough, is it 3 weeks to start and then ongoing, or is it in 3 weeks period? That's something that I had a question on, actually. You touched on something about the 3 week minimum period. Is it 3 weeks at a time, or can you furlough? I know the minimum period is 3 weeks, but then you don't have to extend it by a further 3 weeks at a time, do you?
Well, Quentin, Steve's view on that now, the 3 week period, my understanding is it had to be 3 weeks periods, but
okay.
I think we brought something out last, or there was a mention last week that so long as you'd done your 3 weeks initially and you didn't return to work, It's a returning to work, which then kicks in another 3-week period. So as I understood it, if you'd done your 3 weeks, and then you could just carry on a rolling basis with a week, or whatever. I think it's back to my only concern. A couple of clients I've spoken to on this is, again, just on the, maybe more on the HR employment law side of it. Make sure your employees understand what's happening, that it's an ongoing, it's now become open-ended. But I believe if he come back and just did 1 day, you would have to then do a new 3-week period.
I guess this would come down to what the terms of the original furlough or ongoing furlough notices would be. If you said you furlough for 3 weeks, then that's what you've told them. If you've told them that they're on furlough, it's going to be for a minimum of 3 weeks until further notice. Probably a slightly different scenario.
I would agree.
Okay, good. You touched on something around notice period during the furlough, and the furlough would cover 80% of their wages. If they were on notice over the end of the furlough period, I take it that the employer would obviously then be liable for the full 100% of the wages during that notice period.
Yes, in the majority of cases, you're going to have to pay 100%, but obviously if furlough ends, you're going to have to pay the full 100%. During furlough, you should be able to claim back 80%. Great.
Okay, good. All right. One thing that Steve touched on, I've got one more question here, and again, it's an interesting one. You mentioned the £6 a week working from home claim for employees. How does that work? Is that something that they would claim?
It usually works as a reimbursement from the employer, but the employee can actually make a claim to the revenue for it, for having worked at home, if the employer doesn't pay it. So if it's a reimbursement from the employer, so he or she pays it, if you've got the money, you can do it, or so you can take the £6 a week and have it tax-free, or you can put a claim in to the revenue on their sort of claim for expenses form, and that would give you tax relief on the £6 a week.
So they could just add it to a regular expense, could they?
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
that's nice and easy then.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually claim more. If you can actually claim far more than that, but you have to justify it to HMRC. So you've got to show that you've incurred additional costs of working at home. Often the broadband is the one which comes in, because people say, oh, in the old days, you used to, there was obviously, well, not obviously, there is often additional costs for using broadband over and above maybe your limits. These days, most broadband is open-ended, so there is no real additional cost from that point of view. And it's an expense rather than something through the payroll, just to answer Maria's question that's just flicked up.
Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great, thank you very much. I will just mention, Steve mentioned something around employee benefits and looking after people when they come back. I'm just going to give a quick plug for something that the British Chamber of Commerce have got, which is an agreement with Westfield Health as a centralised benefit, which you can buy as a chamber member. You get a big discount on that scheme. It's worth looking at. It's a cashback scheme on healthcare. Covers lots of different areas. So I'll include a link in that with the feedback email that comes out as well. I think the questions have come to an end, but that was really worthwhile. Thank you, Steve, from Francis Clarke, and obviously Kate from Clarke Willmott again. I'm sure that you'll agree that was very useful, which is testament to the amount of people on the call. So thank you very much. I will send a feedback form or a feedback email to you. If you've got anything in particular that you'd like to put on there, which we can either pass on to Steve and Kate, or indeed us as a chamber to support us in the work that we're doing to try and support you as employers, that'd be really helpful. Thank you very much. So I'll just round this up by saying thank you again to Steve Ashworth from Francis Clarke. Thank you to Kate Gardner from Clarke Willmott, and all stay safe, stay well, and see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was really good. Everyone. Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Bye now. Bye, Kate. Bye, Alistair.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was good.